Welcome to members of the public who may be joining us by live stream this evening on our live webcast, or if you are tuning in and watching the video after our meeting. And welcome to staff who are joining us both in the chamber and remotely so that we can maintain our physical distancing. And welcome to council colleagues. We have Councillor Garnett to your right as you're watching, to my left, or to my right to your left this evening, and Councillor Rintoul on your right. And joining us by audio, visual to the chamber, but by audio to the public is Councillor Terry O'Keefe, Councillor Barbara Fallett, Councillor Sarah Duncan, Councillor Peter Wainwright. Good evening to all. I'd like to call our regular council meeting for Monday, May the 25th to order. And I'd like to first acknowledge we are holding this evening's meeting in the traditional and ancestral lands of the Wasanich First Nations. And as we turn our minds to the items on our agenda this evening, let us be mindful of the common interests we have with our Wasanich First Nation neighbors. And let's be mindful of the potential implications that our decisions have on these lands and waters that we share with the nations. And forever be mindful that they have been stewards of these lands and waters for millennia. Now I'd like to turn to approval of our agenda, and I have one adjustment I would like to recommend to council for approval, and that is if we turn to item 14, item 13D is funding allocation for Canada Day celebrations, and item 14A is the Folk and Fiddle returning their $1,000 grant and aid with a recommendation. And I'd like to move item 14A to item 13D1 and consider that before the funding allocation for Canada Day celebrations. So item 13D would become 13D2.
I'll move approval as amended.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'd now like to turn to public participation. As we know, during this pandemic, public participation is by two means for members of the public. Members of the public can submit in writing up until the day of our meeting written comments or questions that would be read in the council chamber aloud as a matter of the public record. We do not have any submissions this evening, but we're pleased to welcome two speakers this evening who will join us by audio for public participation. And I'd first like to extend a warm welcome to our Member of Parliament for Saanich and the Gulf Islands, Ms. Elizabeth May. Are you with us this evening, Ms. May? So is she just joining us now? Okay, thank you. And I'm pleased to welcome our Member of Parliament for Saanich Gulf Islands, Ms. Elizabeth May. Welcome. Thank you for taking time in your busy schedule this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, members of council. It's good to see all of you.
Would you like to give us an update of things that you're in?
Sure. Could you, Cliff, could you give me an idea of the appropriate amount of time? I don't want to take too long, and I know there'll be other items on your agenda, but if you give me a sense of what amount of time for an update, and then if there's time for questions, that would be great.
Certainly. We normally allow 3 minutes for public participation, but we're lenient.
Perfect.
And please take a few extra minutes if you need.
Okay, no, I think all of us are aware as elected people how tough the last few months have been, and they continue to be difficult. At the federal level, I can say that as your Member of Parliament, I've been working in a very nonpartisan way with other orders of government, but also specifically across party lines, and have had quite good access to various cabinet ministers. The sequence of events in a very quick sense, a quick summary would be that the first few weeks of the pandemic after Parliament adjourned on March 13th, I have to say the first few weeks, I was mostly working on rescuing constituents who were stuck all over the place, cruise ships, one in Vanuatu, all over. Then it began to morph towards what we were doing in terms of economic relief packages as people began to really experience the economic crunch. First, of course, for individuals through the Emergency Response Benefit, the CERB, and then still there are many cracks in the system and people falling through the cracks working for small business, trying to develop programs that work for small and medium-sized business and very large businesses. And that work, I have to say, grateful to the Saanich Peninsula Chamber of Commerce, connecting me with businesses that had specific issues, trying to keep everybody afloat has been the main goal here. So in sequence, the finance department brought in things that helped individuals, then businesses with the wage subsidy, then 10% to 75% wage subsidy reimbursement, then into, and I think it's quite flawed, the program about how to help people with commercial rent issues, where it's the landlord who has to pick up on the offer. These programs have been rolling out on an almost daily basis, and the work with civil servants has been, until very recently, 7 days a week. The full civil service, Department of Finance, all kinds of departments, employment and social services, and you name it, they've been available Saturdays and Sundays, and MPs have been working on that basis. The big gap here, and I wanted to address it very directly, and then I'll be happy to take any questions you have, is what are we going to do at the federal level to ensure that the municipal order of government is not left high and dry? Now, the big city mayors are being very clear that without the revenue they're used to receiving for transit services and so on, there's a very significant risk that municipal governments may have to start laying off staff. None of the programs designed to help keep people employed were designed to keep municipal employees employed. And I know I was talking recently with Mayor Helps in Victoria, very real concerns that without some form of an emergency package, they'll have to be looking at the threat and the risk of staff layoffs. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities put forward a package of the measures that they think they need, and this has been honestly the one place where when I've pushed Bill Morneau, the Minister of Finance, on something, I've felt the pushback. This is an area of gap. Now I was talking recently with Councillor O'Keefe about the difficulty some local businesses are having in getting staff to come back to work as businesses reopen. That's also a concern we have, and we've taken that to the Minister of Finance to suggest that basically the CERB needs to have a sliding scale so that we can ease people back to work without them worrying that they're going to lose a benefit that right now they're relying upon. So it's a work in progress, trying to get the right balance out of the federal government to ensure that we are getting help to everyone who needs it. The response from Minister Morneau has been that, look, the federal government relief emergency measures are 5 times more in terms of dollar amount, 5 times more than all the provincial governments put together in their relief packages. I continue to press him to say I don't think that's the full answer. The federal level of government has more access to resources, and as a sovereign nation has access to the Bank of Canada, can continue to provide more assistance. And I think it's going to become increasingly an emergency that we get a federal emergency package out to municipal governments. I'll stop there and see if there's any questions. It's a very superficial summary, but it gives you a sense of it.
No, thank you for that summary and those remarks. I'll turn it to my colleagues if you have any questions or comments of Ms. May. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Thanks for being here, Ms. May. One thing I was wondering about was funds for economic stimulus for local governments. And I know our provincial government has talked about that there might be funds coming for that. But I get the sense that maybe they're waiting to see what the federal government has to offer. So I'm wondering if you're able to provide any insights to that in terms of what economic stimulus funds might be coming for local governments. And if so, what can we do to prepare for those and increase our chances of getting our hands on some of that money?
It's a good question. And I think in terms of timing, now this is reading some tea leaves, but I think, obviously we haven't had a federal budget for fiscal 2020-2021. Normally that was scheduled for March. I think we're going to see a federal budget before Parliament, the parliamentary calendar, which is still up in the air. Today was a day that things were supposed to be a bit more settled, but they still remain in negotiation as we speak. I think it's likely we'll see a federal budget for 2020-2021 before the end of June. If I'm looking at the tea leaves, then we'll be looking at that budget announcing the stimulus spending for as we emerge from pandemic and we want to get our economy started again. What does that look like? So moving from emergency relief to up and running and stimulating the economy again. It's going to have to be a bigger package and deeper than what we got in 2008 in terms of the economic crash of 2008. But in that experience, and of course then it was Stephen Harper's government, very strong reliance on municipal order of government and a proven track record that municipal order of government was able to roll out programs efficiently and develop projects that were delivered on time, on budget, and helped stimulate the economy quite quickly. So I think the money is going to flow from municipal order of government. I think it's going to be kicked off late June, but money flowing by early September. The minister with the largest role in this is the Minister for Infrastructure and Local Government. So those have been put together, infrastructure and local government, and that's Minister Catherine McKenna. And I've been talking to her. I mean, there's certainly a lot of interest on her part because she's the former Minister of Environment, which you'll remember, but in projects that are climate-friendly economic stimulus kinds of programs. So thinking ahead and having a project ready to go or multiple projects. I was talking to the South Island partnership that came up with the Smart Cities proposal that had been all around improving public transit on southern Vancouver Island. I would think that if Town of Sydney was working with a cluster of municipalities that improved our transit, well, we know what all the problems we have with transit, but basically ferry terminal, airport to downtown Victoria, something that was a big infrastructure package, but was also tied to we're going to get a lot of cars off the road and reduce the congestion on the Pat Bay Highway. Something like that would be in tune with the times, I think. But anything that you'll have handy that's, forgive the expression, shovel ready, and some of the stuff on cleanup of Ray Creek could fit the bill. Going back to Transport Canada for more money on that. There's a range of things, and I know you've got ideas in the hopper where the town needs financial support. Things that involve being able to get off the ground quickly and employ people quickly will be, I think, quite timely. But I'm again, this is tea leaves. I could be dead wrong. This is just what I think might be coming.
Great, thanks for that.
Thank you.
I sure want to get help to the storekeepers and people who are looking at reopening but have all these additional hurdles of how do you get the PPE so that your customers feel safe as they're coming in the door. I was really pleased to see in the local, I guess it was a tweet from Town of Sydney circulating information about trying to figure out how to let some of our restaurants have more street space. I think that's where I saw it. Forgive me if I've got that wrong, but I think that's the kind of thing we're really going to need this summer is to make sure we get the businesses open, but without packing people indoors.
Thank you. Did any others have questions or comments for Ms. May? Well, thank you again, Elizabeth May, for taking the time this evening. It's nice to see your face in these times, and thank you for the work you're doing. I know my experience with other mayors in the region, with provincial government. I think the lines of communication have opened up as wide as they ever have in terms of dealing this and as much as possible in a nonpartisan way. So thank you for the work you're doing. And
well, thank you for the work all of you are doing. I live in this town, and I really appreciate all the work you do. This is the best place to live. And as proposals come forward, Mr. Mayor, members of council, if there's anything ever that you want me to carry forward, get answers to questions, track things down, I do work for you, and I'd love to be fully engaged in any project where you think my help would make a difference.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We just have a second speaker. Oh, is the speaker joined us? I'd like to welcome Ms. Robin. Sorry, we just have another member of the public joining us electronically here. Good evening. I'd like to introduce Robin Quaintance, who is joining us in public participation this evening. Good evening, Ms. Quaintance. You have the floor. Okay, if you can unmute yourself, Ms. Quaintance. I see you muted at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, please, please. You have approximately 3 minutes, so please go ahead.
Thank you. Our library here in Sydney is inadequate. Its collection lacks depth and seems to have difficulty in collecting a diverse range of fiction and nonfiction works. And there are limitations on interlibrary loans. The recent improvements and renovations of the library building were mostly cosmetic and for the safety of the workers, but had absolutely no impact on the quality or quantity of the collection. The square footage of the building is actually well below the recommendation for the amount of users we have. Council needs to set this as a priority in the strategic plan. Under the Libraries Act, it requires 1 year's notice for the Vancouver Island Regional Library to leave Sydney. My concerns have nothing to do with another possible branch at Panorama. I just want more contemporary fiction and nonfiction books. We spend $750,000 a year for this library service. I don't feel we're getting our money's worth. We promote Sydney as a book town, but we have a third-rate library. Please set this as a priority in the 2021 strategic plan. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, and just to note to the public, we do have in our strategic plan in 2022 a review of library service to our residents, and I think as residents know on the peninsula that Sydney and North Saanich share the library service, providing the library service to residents with the current branch in Sydney, and that when we come to that in our strategic plan, a review of library service would include working closely with District of North Saanich to assess both the service currently and what Virl might be able to offer, as well as what other providers such as Greater Victoria Public Library might provide. So appreciating we're certainly aware at the town of the timeline for doing a review. We're aware that a referendum involving the public is required to make such decisions. And in previously discussing this as a strategic priority, we feel it's prudent to hold a referendum if that's the direction that our two municipalities choose to go at the time of the next election. So we would certainly have to time addressing that strategic priority, considering the length of time it would take to be prepared for such a referendum. So we thank you for your comments, Ms. Quaintance. As always, we would be happy through our library liaison, Councillor Barbara Fallett, to bring specific concerns, as you've noted this evening and others, directly to the Executive Director at Virl. In the interim, until we do move to that priority, we would certainly like to enhance the service at the library, if at all possible, for as many of our residents as possible. So thank you again for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
We have no other speakers this evening, so I'll now bring public participation to a close. And we do have a presentation from our EOC Director, Fire Chief Brett Mickelson. Mr. Mickelson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, Council, and members of the public watching the live webcast. Staffing in our EOC remains at 12 dedicated Town of Sydney and Chamber of Commerce employees focused on both response and recovery initiatives. Operationally, we continue to support the following. Our critical supply rest stop. With the rest stop, we have noted a significant decrease in transport truck use over the past week, and in consultation with the BC Trucking Association are contemplating scaling back or reverting the use of the parking lot back to Mary Winspear and public parking use. With many businesses now reopening, options for food and washroom facilities to transport truck drivers have improved. Lastly, this parking space is essential for staff and clients of our downtown business sector that has largely been dormant for the last 2 months. We maintain our showers for vulnerable persons at Iroquois Park and continue to average 10 to 12 persons over the 5 hours they are open Monday through Friday. We continue to perform wellness checks for homeless persons and enforce our no camping bylaw in parks and public spaces. We also continue to be in daily contact with all of our extended care and nursing homes. They have done exemplary work instituting revised policies to ensure the health and safety of their residents and staff. Having established the Sydney Extended Care and Nursing Home Working Group in 2014 has paid great dividends. This group has shared information and worked collaboratively to source PPE and best practices in response to this pandemic event. Our physical distancing ambassador work in public spaces continues, such as sidewalks, pathways, and parks, and this continues on a daily basis, 7 days a week. We recently reopened the skate, tennis, and sport courts in Sydney with enhanced protocol signage on May 21st. We remain on target for a limited reopening of municipal offices the first week of June. The installation of physical barriers remains the primary constraint that may extend this time. It is important to emphasize that reopening will at least initially be on an appointment-only basis and will be prioritizing and focusing on utilizing electronic forms of payment, and meetings such as Zoom will strongly be encouraged to minimize contact intensity and density amongst interactions between people at the counter and the public. Our Business Liaison Officer initiative remains an area of emphasis for the EOC. From March 20th, which was the start of restaurants and personal service establishments closing, to the announcement of the BC Restart Plan on May 6th, our Business Liaison Officers visited over 70 establishments supporting operating under the Phase 1 essential service restrictions. The BC Restart Plan initially targeted mid-May under enhanced protocols for the beginning of Phase 2, which was later revised to May 19th. Since May 6th, we have been collating sector-specific guidelines and requirements from the province, WorkSafe, and industry regulatory bodies, and to date have performed an additional 75 site visits in support of Phase 2 restarts. This boots-on-the-ground approach to supporting local business is labor-intensive, as it requires individual site visits and business sector-specific research done prior. We expect the demand for this service to remain constant over the coming weeks. We're averaging 5 to 6 visits a day, and then taper off to a maintenance or routine follow-up task after that. Included in the agenda package this evening is a fulsome update on recovery planning provided by Ms. Verhagen's planning section. Opportunity to discuss the EOC recovery planning update, as well as pedestrian and business use of public spaces in our downtown core, we provided under staff reports 13A and 13B. I would also like to thank Mayor and Council for a very productive special council meeting on May 14th. This afforded our policy group and staff the opportunity to discuss our action to date and roles and responsibilities. Responding to disaster events is not unfamiliar to British Columbia. We regularly experience and have plans in place to mitigate and respond to and recover from floods and wildfires, and we're good at it. Response to a pandemic event provides us with a number of different and unique challenges, but the framework to protect public health and minimize societal and economic impact and enhance our future sustainability are the same. Our success to date and moving forward are directly attributable to 5 key factors. our dedicated staff, the existing strong relationships we have in the community. We have a plan. We're able and willing to make timely and difficult decisions, and we communicate with our residents on a daily basis. I'm very proud of how our community has rallied and responded to what has been a very difficult few months. Our situation is improving, but it's far from certain. Sydney's investment to mitigate and recover from the effects of this event have been deliberately aggressive from the outset. I believe our residents and business owners recognize and appreciate this. And to quote our provincial health officer, we're all in the same storm, but we don't have to be on the same boat. And I'll take any questions now.
Thank you, Chief Mickelson. I open it up to council colleagues if you have any questions or comments for Mr. Mickelson. Seeing none, I'll thank you again, Chief, and thank you for that detailed report. We'll now turn to bylaws. Under 5A1, we have bylaw number 2196, which is a zoning amendment number 40 to prohibit all short-term rentals in Sydney, and a report from staff dated May 19th. So I'll just note that that this evening the recommendation would be to introduce and consider first reading, a separate resolution for second reading, and then a third motion that staff be directed to advertise for a public hearing if that's the direction that council wishes to pursue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move first reading.
Second.
All those in favor? None opposed. Motion carries unanimous.
I'll move second reading.
Second.
We'll have open it for discussion. Anybody wishing to speak? Councillor Wainwright, then Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So one thing that I'd like the public to appreciate, if we do make this amendment to the zoning bylaw, any short-term rentals that are currently operating in Sydney and are legal would be grandfathered even after this change. So for those who may be operating a legal Airbnb or other short-term rental now, they really don't need to be worried. They will be grandfathered and will be able to continue. This bylaw would prevent any new ones from starting up.
Thank you, Councillor, for that. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. Having looked at the additional recommendations that staff has come up with, I am on the fence about those. I'm overall still in favor of this motion and going forward to public hearing.
Okay, Councillor Duncan, we just accidentally muted there. If you could unmute.
There we go. Let's hope that'll stay. I'm not entirely in favor with the full rationale for this as being removing economic competition. I'm not certain if that's the best and wisest move for us to step in here, but I'm still overall in favor of the motion. I know we've been concerned about, or concern has been expressed by other councillors about people, simply shifting from an Airbnb to a bed and breakfast model. I'm not concerned that would be an issue simply because it wasn't before. We only have the 2 bed and breakfasts and the fairly low bar to establish that business. Nobody has wanted to clear before, and I think it's just the extremely low bar of the Airbnb format that has prompted people to do this. Nevertheless, I still think that keeping our travelers in hotels and motels in the future will be best for us overall, in that hotels and motels will continue to offer economic benefits to the entire town and their employees if they thrive. Whereas even if people were going to Airbnbs, I know a lot of people feel that this would help individual residents with additional income. And I know we've received a lot of correspondence to that effect, but it helps individuals at the expense of everyone else. And so overall, I believe that the benefit is better to keep in the hotels and the motels. And for the reason I stated last time, which is simply to keep travelers in a place that we know is undergoing rigorous cleaning and screening and tracking of travelers.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm in favor of the bylaw and in favor of the additional things that staff have talked about in terms of prohibiting bed and breakfast as well. For me, the number one thing overall is that I'm thinking about is the lack of affordable housing, which impacts our ability for attract younger people here. And so anything that prohibits the use of condos and secondary suites, I think, is a good thing. On the other hand, prior to the pandemic, we did have a shortage of accommodation space. And I think there still needs to be a range of options for tourists, which are an important component of our economy. And like Councillor Duncan says, you know, it's good to have a bit of competition as well. Yes, I know that the hotel and inn sector is suffering right now because of the pandemic, but that will, you know, they will recover eventually. What I had talked to staff about was whether there was an option, some sort of middle ground that would allow people who wanted to do a bed and breakfast to do so without going through a rezoning process. My understanding from staff, and maybe if Mr. Newcomb is on the line, he can confirm my understanding that there already are requirements for bed and breakfast, which are quite rigorous. They still have to provide parking, they have to license, fire inspection, etc. But the problem is that not all of those not all locations are suitable for bed and breakfast. And so my understanding is by prohibiting bed and breakfasts, people can still apply for rezoning, but they would have to go through a more rigorous process that would allow staff and council to determine whether that particular location is a good fit. Maybe I'll ask through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Newcomb, if he's there, or staff, whether I've captured that accurately.
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, yes, you have.
Okay. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the whole reason that, or the premise behind why Councillor Wainwright brought this forward is a solid one, and I think for the time that we're in right now, I think it's an important change to make. I mean, if in the future things get back to whatever our new normal is, we can look at this and maybe amend it. But I think for now, given how hard the tourism industry has been hit here and everywhere else, I think we need to do all we can to support our hotels and motels and bed and breakfast, if you will, moving forward, so that when the tourists do start to come back, that is their first choice. And we want that to help stimulate our economy. So I think we need to look at that from that perspective, and that in the future, if we want to revisit this, or our future council wants to revisit it, they can. But I think for the now and the time, it's an important move to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And like my colleagues, I'm comfortable with proceeding along these lines and look forward to the opportunity for public hearing to get some further insight and input on this. I agree with Councillor Keith's comment around capacity issues in relation to hotels in the local market, and so I feel that, like Councillor Garnett's comments, this is almost part of a recovery action in terms of providing more of a level playing field for those businesses and to help them with respect to recovery. I am cognizant of the fact that some of these short-term rentals are actually long-term in nature, in a sense, for visitors coming to spend 1, 2, or 3 months in our community, and perhaps sort of testing the waters here to see if this is somewhere they might want to call home as well. And so there are some unique markets that these provide opportunity for visitors to our community as well. And I look forward to hearing that sort of input, hopefully from the public, around the type of magnitude of economic impact that the current arrangement has on the community that we may not be fully aware of. At any rate, I'll leave it there, Mr. Mayor, and continue to support the bylaws proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other speakers, I'll call the question. All those in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you.
I'll move that staff be directed to advertise for a public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We have 3 sets of minutes to approve under adoption of minutes. Our special council meeting of May the 11th, our regular council meeting of May the 11th, and our special council meeting of May the 14th.
I'll move adoption of the 3 sets of minutes.
Second.
Any errors or omissions? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And I'll turn to a brief mayor's report. I'd first like to just comment that last week we had a SIP partners meeting, and a couple of weeks ago I announced or it had been announced in the media, and I brought it forward at council that SIP had announced the Rising Economy Task Force with multiple stakeholders throughout the region, and they have currently are currently finalizing their terms of reference. They've set 10 different committees. A committee structure with 10 different committees for different sectors of our community and local economy, regional economy, and that will be moving forward. On Thursday, I was pleased to attend by Zoom meeting the third annual prosperity announcement of the Prosperity Index, and interesting to note that given the pandemic times that we're in and the direction that SIP is taking with the Rising Economy Task Force, that they now have a monthly dashboard that they will be using, and I think they have about 10 metrics to start, and they'll be adding to that, such as construction, real estate sales, employment, and the like, gathering that together, which will be helpful information, I think, to different sectors throughout the region. All of this information is available on the SIP, South Island Prosperity Partnership website. There are links, and there are now links such that you can get weekly updates from SIP. So just want to bring that to council and also to members of the public who may want to watch our recovery on a regional basis. Secondly, I'd just like to take a moment to applaud the businesses who opened under the Restart program last week. It's been a very difficult 10 to 12 weeks for businesses who closed or had to close a significant portion of their business, and quite frankly, I think it takes a bit of bravery to reorganize the business such that you can open it in a safe way for not only their employees but for members of the public. I hope the public is gaining confidence, particularly from the measures that our Emergency Operations Center has taken from the start of this pandemic. And as Chief Mickelson has reported this evening, we have daily contacts with senior care homes, with the homeless population, and checks on how they're doing, and over 150 business inspection or business contacts through the Business Liaison Officer program, and that's important to businesses to have that support. And WorkSafe BC has certainly provided some very valuable information, both by sector, but both in information, excuse me, that our EOC business liaison officers have made copies and distributed to business such that there can be consistency and some continuity in messaging to members of the public when they're out at businesses. So I applaud the businesses and services who opened, whether it was a dentist, whether it was a general retail store, or personal services. Congratulations to you all. We certainly wish you well, and I want to applaud our business liaison officers that have helped facilitate that process. Thank you. Now, we do have one committee to report this evening. I'd like to turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple things from me. First from the Shaw Centre, and then from the Sydney Business Improvement Area. So the Shaw Centre provided an update this past week on how they have responded to the pandemic. So they closed to the public on March 15th and began business continuity planning to ensure that their critters and their infrastructure remained intact throughout the closure. In April, they had to reduce their staff from 17 to 6. just keeping on essential numbers of people to keep the facility and the critters going. In the meantime, they've revitalized their online presence. They applied and received funds from several federal and provincial programs to support organizations like theirs. They've also secured a number of donations from private individuals and private foundations, and they've made plans for a membership drive that they hope to launch in June. Now they're focusing on preparing to reopen. They have prepared a very detailed reactivation framework, which has been submitted to the town's EOC for approval. It includes a detailed COVID-19 safety plan that's aligned with WorkSafe BC guidelines. They're taking a phased approach, starting small, and they're very cautious and also recognizing the potential for a second wave. And keeping that in mind, they have a quick close down procedure that they've put together in the event that staff get sick or in the unfortunate circumstance of an outbreak in Sydney. They've continued to stay in touch with town staff and have been very appreciative of the support that staff and the EOC have been provided to them. In regards to the SBIA, they had their board meeting this past week, and just a couple of a few FYI things. Some of them expressed frustration with the rent assistance program offered by the federal government. A lot of them weren't able to take advantage of that because apparently there needs to be a mortgage on the property. So any businesses who have the misfortune of renting from a landlord without a mortgage weren't eligible for that relief. In terms of their restart, many expressed concern, as Ms. May articulated earlier, about getting employees to come back to work. So some of them are preferring they'd like to have the summer off and collect the federal benefits. Others are coming back full-time or part-time, but asking their employer to pay them full-time benefits. So there was one business that mentioned that additional cost of having a part-time person, but having to pay full-time wages. There was some concern about parking, especially on the weekends. They did mention that the construction going on downtown is having an impact. There was different opinions about whether the town should continue with enforcement or not. In the end, it was decided that the BIA would update and redistribute the parking information cards to businesses in efforts to educate the public or re-educate them about the free parking in Sydney and how to access that. They also, a lot of feedback on the positive feedback, again, on the business ambassadors from the EOC and the support that they were receiving from the SBIA as well. And I think that's about it, unless anybody has questions.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay.
Seeing no questions, I'll move on to our committee reports, and we do have the minutes from our OCP Review Advisory Committee from May the 14th.
I'll move receipt.
Second.
Any discussion? I'll just comment that it was our first meeting, Councillor Wainwright as a councillor appointment to the committee, and I joined the 7 new community members who were appointed, and I think we had a productive first start with staff, our CEO Randy Humble, and senior manager of long range planning Corey Newcomb, and we look forward to engaging the community as we move forward. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Oh, Councillor O'Keefe.
Yep, thank you. No, just one thing that caught my eye in the minutes that I just want to comment on, and was the comments from Ms. Naworth regarding community engagement and some apparent reluctance by some committee members to use Twitter and Facebook with a preference to rely on traditional methods such as email or Town of Sydney website. And I guess I just wanted to point out that, while we do have a higher percentage of people over 65 compared to the rest of the CRD, they represent only 39% of our population. So the majority of our population is under 65. And I think if we want to achieve a more balanced demographic and want to hear from younger folks, that it's important to utilize those other sorts of methods that she talked about in terms of Twitter and Facebook. So for the committee's consideration, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and thanks for touching on that. Certainly there was discussion, but I think there was consensus that we'll use as much as broad a form of communications to our residents, appreciating the different demographics. But thank you for those comments. Councillor Duncan, you have the floor.
Thank you. I noticed that discussion as well that Councillor O'Keefe did, and the note that I had made to myself was that usually when you start talking about engagement, we spend a lot of time talking about the format of engagement. People get bogged down in the technique we're going to use. And it was making me think of the BC Restart, the survey that BC is doing about their restart plan, and how right out of the gate, they got huge numbers of responses, and they're still asking for some. But initial reports we've seen was that, the only group that had been initially underrepresented was young, white, rural males, which demonstrates that it's not necessarily the older groups that are not doing the survey simply because it's digital. It's the younger groups because they don't care. They don't see how it affects them. I can see particularly why that group would feel, pandemic issues don't affect them because they probably don't see it as much in rural areas, and they're, the demographic least likely to be sickened by it. So I feel like our biggest thing that we need to look at is not what media we use, what method we use, but making sure that we make it really clear to people in whatever we do that it's not a how, it's a why. Why do you care? And people will come. People will endure trying a new technology if they really, really think that getting their opinion in matters. So I think that'll be the crucial thing to look at, not necessarily our technology. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favour? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll now turn to item 13A, the EOC recovery planning update. And I want to welcome Alison Verhagen, our manager of current planning, senior manager of current planning, and Mr. Jim Lamort, principal with Smart Risk Control, who's been working as a consultant to our EOC as well. Good evening to both, and Ms. Allison Ms. Verhagen, could you please introduce the item for us this evening?
Sure, thank you. Through the mayor to all of council, I'll just provide a very quick introduction to the report. It's quite comprehensive. So the report provides an update on recovery planning in the EOC with a summary of the work that Smart Risk Control Incorporated has undertaken for the EOC in the advanced planning section. It also has an outline of the current focus of recovery planning, that being supporting the community well-being and the business community. A number of ideas have come in from the community members, from council, from EOC staff, and generated through the recovery planning process for recovery actions, which are really much appreciated. And EOC planning staff are currently reviewing those ideas to see which are feasible given the EOC's objectives for recovery planning. Those are presented to council in late April. Also given council's high-level policy direction provided on May 14th, as well as budget, staff time, and resource considerations. So I'd be happy to answer any questions from council at this point, or possibly refer them to Mr. Lamort as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that introduction. I'll open it up to colleagues for any comments or questions of Ms. Verhagen. Councillor Rantoul.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Verhagen, and to Chief Mickelson for your earlier report. Maybe you can elaborate, and I know you both have touched on this in your reports around the kind of the role of the ambassadors in reaching out to, in particular, the business community to offer them some insight and guidance. Maybe just provide a little context around whether or not we are going out proactively and approaching businesses, whether or not you're receiving calls for insight and assistance, and just how that process is working, if you would, please.
Sure. Through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul. It's both proactive and reactive there. The business liaison officers or ambassadors are going out and monitoring the downtown commercial areas, parks, public spaces, other commercial areas, just to see how people are doing, see what businesses are opening. They're there to answer questions if needed, and monitoring pedestrian situations, looking for are there any hotspots or pinch points, as are talked about in the next report. And also, we've made the offer to the business community that if they would like somebody to come meet with them on site to look at how they could reopen their business safely and possibly steer them towards some resources, the business liaison officers are doing that as well. Chief Mickelson, I'm not sure if you wanted to jump in there and comment as well.
Sure. Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul. I would just add again the benefit of having a chamber member embedded in the EOC is that ability that when those requests for assistance come in, they're within earshot, and that communication is essentially seamless. So a lot of that can go on, and from a reactive sense, it becomes almost proactive. So we're kind of on it in a bunch of different ways, but we are walking the streets as well and finding out exactly, are there a few businesses that are opening without our knowledge? There are a few, but not many. And we make sure that we try to walk in and just provide them with a bit of a quick look and hi, how can we help you as well? So we try to have lots of feet on the street.
Thank you. Councillor Rintoul, you'll follow up?
Yeah, if I could just in follow up, thank you very much for providing that context. I appreciate it. Further to your report with respect to the appendix, perhaps Ms. Verhagen, if I could, through the mayor to you, if you can chat a little bit about whether or not the recommendations or the observations in this appendix are at all sort of ranked in priority in terms of how you address them, or if you see this more as sort of a menu of options for the town to be able to zero in on some priorities identified in here, because it's certainly a very fulsome list of recommendations and very broad in terms of its context as well.
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, you're right that it is a broad spectrum of project summaries there and actions that are proposed. They are not in any order of priority. They are in order if you referred back to the previous council report, which listed the 10 objectives. The numbers at the top of each one refer to the objective that they're related to. You'll see some are 4.2, 5.3. They all have numbers to them. So these are project summaries based on a list of actions that were developed under each objective. Towards the end of the appendix, there is a table that has a longer list of actions. So the one-page summaries of the projects relate to those actions. So to summarize, no, they're not in any order of priority. They are in order of objective from previous lists.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett, then Councillor Wainwright, then Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question and a sort of a general comment through you to Ms. Verhagen. Under the financial implications part, when you are talking about a second contract with Smart Risk Control, is that for this? We're looking at the same 1 month term for $10,000 as last time?
Sure. Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, we are looking at a slightly longer term through possibly June through into July. And the budget figure hasn't been decided yet, no, but that would be taken from the $50,000 budget item that council previously approved for EOC work.
Thank you. Yeah, I was assuming it would come from there. I just don't want to leave us too short in that 50,000 if we spend too much on one thing. That's just one of the concerns I have. With regards to the advanced planning under Appendix A, specifically 4.2, and it's something that I brought up with Mr. Dixon from the Victoria Airport Authority, and I still can't get off the idea that I know that they need those grounds probably now more than ever from an economic standpoint with the downturn in airline travel. But what a great place to have food grown, and it's not just enhances our food gathering in our local area, but it also, I think, contributes to community well-being for many of our people. Residents can get out and have a small plot of garden just for food, but just to get out and get fresh air and commute with nature. So it's just something I'm going to keep harping on that and hoping he'll take a hold of it eventually. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I turn to Councillor Wainwright. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the report, and I guess my questions initially are for clarification. It's stated in the report you mentioned that you've had a bunch of ideas from a variety of sources, including from staff, that you're considering. So my understanding then is that Appendix A, that is not the plan. That's simply a list of ideas that Smart Risk presented. And probably the reason it's in there is that council asked for some report on what Smart Risk had done under their contract. So am I correct? That isn't the plan. It's just a list. It's a report of, in part, of what Smart Risk did for the contract that has just wrapped up.
Yes, through the mayor to Councillor Wainwright, that's correct. It's a summary of Smart Risk Control's work thus far in the advanced planning section. It's not a comprehensive list of all the ideas that have been submitted.
Okay. And the other clarification question is about the part of the report where it discusses financial implications. So my understanding is that that's financial implications of essentially the ongoing recovery tasks. And the reason I say that, if we were, for example, to actually make some permanent changes to sidewalks in the downtown, for example, to deal with the pinch points, that's obviously going to have financial implications. So that's my understanding is you're simply saying work in progress has not identified any financial implications, but when you bring forward the full plan, there might be some. Is that correct?
If there's recovery actions that have significant financial implications that are not reimbursable by the province and would put a big dent in that 50,000, I think we would be letting the policy group know. In terms of permanent, like using your example, the permanent changes to sidewalks in the downtown, that may not be a pandemic recovery action. That may be a kind of a build back better community resilience action. So we'd have to give some thought as to how to fund that and which budget is the right one to take that from. Maybe Mr. Humble might want to comment on that as well. I'm not sure.
Mr. Humble.
Through the mayor, no, I don't really have a comment on that per se. I would agree that any costs outside of what's covered by EMBC should come forward to council. So I can certainly say that. One thing I wanted to note, in the report, it indicates that this is under discussion, and it's the second sentence in the discussion, where it reads, it's important to be aware at the outset of this update that the recovery planning phase is a process and a series of actions that will result in added to and amended over time as community needs and resources change. It will not result in a final plan document like many other town planning projects have done. So I think that's an important consideration. So I just wonder if Ms. Verhagen or Mr. Lamort might be able to comment on that component specifically.
Sure, yeah, through the mayor to all of council. That is a good point to raise. Thank you, Mr. Humble there. That the recovery actions, it's more of a list of actions and a status of what we've undertaken, what's suitable to undertake given the objectives that we've established. What the status is of the action, which community group or resource resource period that we're using to work on that action. It's more of a kind of a running spreadsheet than a document that will be finalized, and priorities continually change and shift. So as the pandemic recovery continues, who knows what's coming in the next weeks or months or where this will go, but we'll have a more fulsome list of what actions we're undertaking and with who in the coming weeks.
Thank you. Did you wish to continue, Councillor Wainwright? So you're
No,
just,
I'll let somebody else for now.
okay, thank you. We'll turn to Councillor Fallot, then Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, staff, for this report. It is a very fulsome report, and interestingly enough, Mr. Humble, I had highlighted exactly those two sentences out of that discussion paragraph because it is a very important point that was made there. A couple of things that leapt out at me was the, I don't want to get down in the weeds, but just some things that just want to bring up under 1.3 where they're talking about collect data for pandemic planning. I have a little bit of difficulty with that process of looking at collecting data, contact data, and things like that. So that's just a comment. And then 5.3, where they talk about developed neighbors helping each other. Have we looked at connecting with church groups and social groups such as, the Rotary, any other service groups and sports clubs to see what they're doing for their membership? That's another resource to tap into our community. And rather than us as a municipality doing some work that may already be done in an outreach through organizations such as churches, clubs, etc. Is there a comment from staff on that, please?
Yes, through the mayor to Councillor Fallot, we do have a chamber member actually working through Denny Warner, our executive director of the chamber, who's working out of the EOC currently. A staff member at the chamber is contacting community groups to check on their status. How are they doing through this? What their capacity is for being involved in recovery and what work they're doing as an organization right now to support their members. So we are in the middle of collecting all of that data. And yeah, I do think that those existing community groups and social groups will be important in the neighbors helping neighbors and connecting neighborhood groups.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. It is important for us to know that our community is being connected, but also that is another resource that if we need to do an outreach, we need something that there are groups that we can tap into. And the other thing I want to touch on is our website. And I know I've brought this up in the past, but as we're going through this COVID and our response and recovery, our town website becomes even more important. And has any thought been given, or is there a possibility that we can upgrade how our website functions? My personal opinion, I don't like it. It's cumbersome. I feel that if I want to click on something, that page should open up rather than then having to scroll through. And we're looking at doing surveys. We're looking at connecting with people. I think our website is an important tool as we move forward, and that needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, for starting to tackle this. I know this is a really big thing to look at. This is a disaster that doesn't just have local repercussions, but it's all over the globe, and how things are working out all over the globe are then coming back and causing different effects here beyond just the infectiousness of a disease. And you first captured that in things like the food security piece. And I really also appreciate the neighbors helping neighbors aspect that's gone into it, and the idea of being able to actually really establish kind of like an old-fashioned phone tree, knowing which organizations to tap into that can tap into people and get information out faster. And I really like that. So it brought up the question, I guess, when Councillor Garnett started talking about the food security piece. We know that one of SIP's projects that they're beginning is, of course, the research project into the need for an abattoir on the South Island. And that would be a big one. And I can't resist the opportunity to get one of my old drums and just start banging on it about processing and storage being, in fact, the greatest limitation to food security here on the peninsula, at least, is that we already have a lot of farmers who know how to grow food really well. And in order for them to scale up and use their land better, we actually need better storage facilities. And I would be kind of hoping that SIP would get into that as well. And I see a lot of overlap for things that might actually be being done on a regional scale that we can kind of just tap into, but not necessarily have to utilize our own town staff to do. And I don't know if this would be a question for Mr. Hagan or perhaps even the mayor, because I know he's so involved in the SIP recovery issues. If there's more that SIP might be doing on a regional scale to look at some of those larger issues in the food supply, that we can just kind of ride on that coattail.
I'll turn to Ms. Verhagen first, and I can offer a comment as well.
Through the mayor to Councillor Duncan, I see that as being something that perhaps Sydney's EOC could advocate for and work towards. I don't see that something we can address first on kind of at a Sydney level scale, but I think if we could work regionally to work together to coordinate that for the South Island, that would be a big benefit for farmers and food producers on the South Island. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just add the comment that I think a number of us were on the farm tour in the first year of our term, and we visited a number of the farms, and it was brought home quite clearly that, as Councillor Duncan has remarked, that in terms of food security, food processing and food storage is a large issue, and these were primarily central sandage farms that we were looking at, but it is a challenge for farmers wherever they are in the region. And so I think a topic, depending on what aspect of food security you're considering, that there will be regional aspects that might be more appropriate for SIP to work with, and then there might be more things locally that we would wish to address. But I do know that from the early meetings with SIP that they don't want to be duplicating. On the one hand, they don't want to be duplicating something that is happening on a municipal or a sub-regional basis, but they also don't want to leave gaps. So they're trying to establish relationships with the organizations that participate locally, as well as the ones that are operating or functioning regionally. So not sure that directly addresses it, but I think there will be some aspects of food security that are better addressed regionally, and others that we can address locally for our residents or jointly with neighboring municipalities. Did you wish to continue, Councillor Duncan?
Well, I guess that mostly answered it. That Ms. Verhagen mentioned it, that mostly the issues that we've just brought up now are things that Sydney can't address, but they might be the biggest ones. And Central Saanich may be, perhaps as an individual municipality, as an example, better situated to deal with that. But if individual municipalities can't, I'm hoping that there's some mechanism we have to use this kind of recovery planning process that each of us will be going into to make sure that it still gets done, because each municipality doesn't look like we're in a position to be able to do it on our own. And SIP has began looking at what they can do and hope that they don't, overlap. But it seems like nobody's doing this one yet. And whatever we can do to make sure that it gets done jointly would probably be a big help right now.
Well, just a final comment. I didn't indicate that the committees are announced, or sorry, have been formed. I don't know that that they're announced yet on the SIP website. They are to come any day now, but one of them is an agricultural committee. You did mention the abattoir initiative, but each of the committees have a terms of reference, and their first task will be to set, similar to the process we've seen in this report tonight, is to set objectives and actions under each of those. And I would encourage you, or I can certainly try to take it. I'm not sitting on that particular committee. I do believe there are representatives from Central Saanich sitting on that committee, but SIP is welcoming, concerns or comments from throughout the region. And so I think if we engage SIP directly with those comments in terms of the priority that you've identified, I think that would be helpful.
Thank you.
We'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So thank you, staff, for the report. Lots of good ideas and things here. As I look through it, I'm glad you clarified that these are not not all of these things will necessarily get done, and I presume that as you get results from the survey and from the residents and business community, you'll continue to fine tune it. But what sort of strikes me is the myriad of things that there are. And as someone mentioned before, you know, being mindful of us being a small town with limited resources and what we can and can't do. So I think that as we look at these things, important considerations will be, you know, to what degree and within what scope we have to respond. And I guess what's in my mind is when we're looking at new initiatives, I'd be thinking about those that are absolutely critical to our immediate recovery. And maybe there'll be other things that get submitted through the survey or ideas that maybe don't necessarily fit within recovery, or maybe they're more long-term. And so that I presume that those would be referred to council perhaps as considerations for strategic planning for some of those more long-term things. You know, another thing that as I look through this, there was a few sort of overarching principles that came to my mind in terms of how we might consider prioritizing these items in terms of the degree and the scope. The first one was, I think, an obvious one is, you know, obviously not wanting to reinvent the wheel or spend time repackaging resources that are already available. The food gardens was an example for me in terms of, I know that people around town are setting up gardens all over the place in their front yards, and I think it's great. There's lots of resources already available within the CRD. I sat in on a webinar that I think it was CR Fair that sponsored it this week about how to help gardeners, and lots of local Facebook sites and everything. And so I guess my point is I think it's good to promote gardening, but I don't know whether I would see the town, you know, expending a lot of time and resources in terms of having a website specifically for that, or you know, a hotline, or because I think there's other places that, or organizations that could offer that. I get the other overarching thing I was thinking about was keeping in our own lane and not getting into areas that are responsible for other authorities like Island Health and WorkSafe. So a couple things that popped out to me was the contract tracing and the designing and implementing of health measures. And there wasn't enough information there for me to exactly know where we were going with that, but it just sort of occurred to me that I wonder if we should be getting into that. Is that something that we should leave to Island Health and WorkSafe, unless they come to us and say, you know, can you help us with this, like they have with the enforcement? My third one, there's four, so I'm on number 3, was about like the degree and the scope with some of these things. So for example, I think I agree that we should promote the use of face masks and let people know how to get them. I think that's a good thing to do. But what I'm not so sure of is whether we need to spend time developing methods to track whether people are wearing face masks and documenting the effort. So the value in that is a little less clear to me as it's outlined. Similar in terms of helping the business community. I think there's some good ideas about the business community switching to more digital formats and free business advisory services. But again, I think that those are things that I don't necessarily see the town investing time or money in that. That those are things that the chamber, the BIA, and maybe that's in the plans already. And then I guess the last thing for me was just in terms of finding the right time for stakeholders to provide input to some of the proposed actions. There's a number of ideas in the report that have come from countries around the world, and I think it's really good that we've done that research to get other ideas. But I'd like to hear from, for example, our local business community. And I know that we're doing a survey that will come. But what I'd also wondering is whether the time is coming for us to consider calling our Economic Advisory Committee together to look at some of the results that come from the survey and to provide some input on that. They have sort of good situational awareness of the town. It's also, you know, one of the reasons we set up the EAC was an opportunity for different sectors to come together to share experience, look for opportunities to collaborate within and across different sectors. And I know that there was something like that in the report about providing opportunities for that. So bringing EAC together seemed to be an opportunity to do that. I'd also like to see EAC, for example, spend some time thinking about plans for economic stimulus and resiliency. And I'm not sure if that's also part of what's planned on the recovery or not. So yeah, so just a few things for consideration. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Before going to second-time speakers, I'd like to speak first, and then Councillor Rintoul, and then Councillor Wainwright. I'll just make a note here. So thank you to the recovery team for this detailed report. I actually have a couple of questions, and one I'm actually turning to the last page in Appendix B. And it actually has a list of objectives. There are 10 different objectives, which was referred to in the covering report. But there are some 40 action plans. And there's a nice little checklist along the left side of these 40 actions, indicating ones that have been done. So, for example, identify facilities available to support mental health response, help residents of care and nursing homes connect digitally with families. So a number of actions have already commenced and been completed. We do see in Appendix A that 14 of those actions have action plans that that fill out the objective a little bit more and the objective, and then have discussion in the action plans. But there's about 10 to 12 action plans in that longer list that don't have anything beside them, and I'm wondering if those are still in consideration through the recovery team and may appear with possible actions, or whether some of them are no longer in the hopper, as it were.
Sure. To the mayor, yes, some of those are still being considered. Some of them we just haven't updated the list yet. Like, I'll draw your attention to 7.7, advise local businesses on accessing financial assistance. There's lots of links on the town website for all the latest government funding announcements that have been made. So some of them are underway or complete, being updated as the situation changes. Yeah, some of them have not been prioritized yet.
Okay. No, thank you for that. I wanted to confirm that aspect. The second is in Appendix A, there are the 14 actions, and then the 15th item is 10.1, determine examine urban design options, and within that there is what is it about? There's 11 separate items within that, but those haven't been broken out into particular objectives or actions. And having said that, we did receive a late addition to this, which is item 10.2, which speaks directly to the extended sidewalk spaces hotspots. So is it under consideration that those other 10 items within that catch-all of examine urban design are still under consideration as well?
Through the mayor, yes. Those are under consideration. Some of them are under consideration for recovery actions. Some of them are more long-term ideas that we would be recommending to strategic planning and recommending forward to other town departments for consideration in long-range planning, engineering, capital planning, etc. I might see if Mr. Lamort has any comments here on those as well. I see he might be wanting to comment there.
Mr. Lamort.
Yes, thank you. I think this list represents the culmination of a lot of good ideas from urban planners around the world. These are the practices that are being put into place in many municipalities worth thinking about in the town. Not everything's going to fit, obviously. And some we can take actions on right away. Active transportation has come up in many communities, and I know that's an interest to council as well. So there are some things that we can do immediately to forward that, but it is a long-term objective, a long-term recovery effort. So it's kind of a mishmash of ideas. We leave it to the EOC to make priorities and make decisions on those. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a comment. I mean, there's a lot of good information in that. As you say, it's been gathered from sources around the world. Whether it's active transportation or enable play streets, whatever the item is within there, there are other locations in the world cited, and I noted that a lot of them are the largest cities in the world: New York, London, Paris, Milan, Oakland, Vancouver. When doing the research to gather some of that information, were there comparables for smaller communities such as the community the size of Sydney?
We specifically look for that aspect, but unfortunately, most of the smaller communities don't have the resources to put their experience on the internet, and all of our research was internet-based. So we do know of some local communities that are enacting some of these. City of Victoria is one example, but we were limited to what was available to us at the time.
Thank you. I'll now turn to second-time speakers, Councillor Rintoul and Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just a comment through to staff, and I don't know if it's really the EOC or if it's broader suggestion to staff at large with respect to recovery. And I think that is, we'd be remiss not to take note of Ms. May's comments this evening, particularly around the potential for infrastructure funding and the reference that she made there. And when you look at where we're at with some potential projects, whether or not, at least from the planning and advanced steps in the background, if a project could be targeted and expedited on the planning side to be ready and to react to opportunities, so that Sydney is front of the line when federal funding perhaps comes available for these initiatives. And whether that's improvements to the ferry terminal to support transportation initiatives by water and tourism, whether it's Beacon Wharf to promote tourism and again opportunities for the South and Gulf Islands to commute to Sydney by water. We have a number of initiatives on our plans currently that perhaps could be in a position to take advantage of an opportunity of that nature. So I'll leave that there for staff's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Humble.
Yeah, just to respond to Councillor Rintoul. So, one thing this pandemic has allowed is staff to focus on a lot of the detailed engineering work that needs to be undertaken for our capital projects, and that's been a real focus of late, and we've been able to make some positive headway on that. And so again, our focus is on having I guess shovel-worthy projects ready to move forward, and that's what we'll be doing. So we hear that loud and clear. So thank you.
Thank you. Now turn to Councillor Wainwright, and then Councillor Fallett, then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So one of the things that I'm interested in that I didn't see in the update report is, I guess, the timeline for stepping down from emergency through to getting back to normal. And I want to preface my question or my comments with, I'm not in any way wanting to rush this. I respect that things need to be done in a thoughtful, staged way, and I'm not looking for anybody to toss out dates. But we've heard that a vaccine may be like 12 months to 18 months. This could be going on for quite a while. There could be second wave. We've heard that some sectors, like the accommodation tourism, may take a couple of years to recover. So we've moved, or we're moving from response to recovery to eventually it'll be the Build Back Better sort of phase. And what I'm not seeing any discussion about, and I'm kind of interested in, what's the trigger where we would stand down from EOC level 2 to EOC level 1? What is the trigger when the EOC actually stands down entirely? What is the transition like from the operations that EOC is overseeing now to those operations essentially being returned to oversight by the normal sort of town operations? So what are we looking at, or do you have any kind of thoughts on timeline and what the triggers would be? I'm not even sure if I'm getting all the stages in this process correct, so I'm interested in that as well.
Thank you. Chief?
Through the mayor to Councillor Wainwright, a number of good questions there, and I guess the first one would be differentiation between a level 2 EOC and a level 1. Right now we're operating primarily at a level 2 because we're supporting operations, largely supporting the homeless for personal hygiene needs, obviously a critical supply restaurant, our business liaison officer. A lot of operations are going on in addition to our recovery planning. When a lot of those, and I believe in my previous update, when we can kind of taper off a lot of supporting a number of these operational activities, you could likely see the EOC collapse closer to what a level 1, let's say half a dozen people, depending on circumstance, would be more of a facilitating a longer range recovery. How long a recovery goes, and I would ask Jim Lamort, being the expert, but typically a recovery is defined by EMBC until a community recovers societally and kind of physically from an infrastructure perspective as well as it can reasonably to a pre-disaster state. So, for example, the city of Grand Forks still had about 12 to 14 people in a functioning EOC working on recovery operations right up until the floods happened again. So there isn't a set time frame, or we don't, the clock doesn't run out. It's as circumstances dictate. And of course, this is a very unique circumstance. We haven't gone through this before. So I hope that answers, some of the questions. We also have to understand that we have to be prepared to scale down, and we're very much looking forward to that. But then if circumstances dictate and things worsen, we have to go back the other way. So that's kind of where we are right now, and I hope that answers some of the questions.
Thank you. If I could just add an additional question to Councillor Wainwright's, would a possible trigger be the province ending the provincial state of emergency, and when does EMBC is the EMBC structure and funding tied to that declaration of provincial state of emergency?
So the answer is yes, and typically what will happen is with the ending of a declaration, it may coincide with the limitation or the lessening of funding from 100% down to 80%, and they fund 80% for recovery operations. But again, As I mentioned before, we do floods and fires very well. The recovery aspects in one community are going to be, and the operations that are going on to support a homeless population in Victoria is going to be different than it is in a Soyuz, for example. So I don't know if you can just flick one switch and say now British Columbia is now simply on recovery. I think that may be municipality and specific and geographically specific.
Thank you. Mr. Humble.
Just to add to Chief Mickelson's comments, and because I'm following sort of where different municipalities are at in the region with respect to their EOC levels, and it really ranges anything from still operating at EOC level 2 to those that are down to EOC level 1, or almost having virtual sort of EOCs and meeting maybe once or twice a week with respect to discussing their emergency management coordination. So it really does vary throughout the region. One of the important things to be mindful of is that some of those that, for example, may have dropped down to an EOC level 1 also have dedicated emergency management coordinators. In other words, they've got, or multiple emergency management coordinators within a specific department. So here in Sydney, we've, as the chief has indicated, we've taken a very sort of aggressive, proactive approach to it, and based on council's support, and I guess we'll continue down that path until otherwise indicated. But it is important to note that it really does vary in terms of the resources that various municipalities have around emergency coordination as well.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I'll turn it back to you, Councillor Wainwright, if you wish to continue.
No, my question's been answered. Thanks.
Thank you. Turn to Councillor Fallett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to loop back to comments that you had made and some of the points you addressed, looking at the back of the report and the reference to larger municipalities, big cities, and how that reflects, and Mr. Lamort saying that smaller municipalities don't necessarily have the funds to post things on the internet, etc. I always see Sydney as being similar to a neighborhood of a large city. So if we look at what large cities are doing, they're doing them in districts and in areas. So I think we can easily take examples from the large cities and shrink them down for us, because we are like a neighborhood. Given the size of Sydney, we're a neighborhood. And I think we have a unique opportunity with all of that. And so I just wanted to bring that out, that idea that we can look at what the big cities are doing. We certainly don't have the resources that the big cities do. And as Mr. Humble just talked about, municipalities that have dedicated EOC directors and emergency management, etc. So we don't have those capabilities, but I think we can still take a lot of our examples from what is happening elsewhere and use them for our own town. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Fallett. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Actually, just building on Councillor Fallett's point about small towns, I'm not sure whether the team is looking at the resources available from the BC Economic Development Association, and they provide a frequently updated list of the different sort of initiatives that municipalities around the province are undertaking. So there might be a little bit of information there on smaller municipalities to look at. The other thing I wanted to touch on was going back to the infrastructure things. One thing that Ms. May mentioned that jumped out at me was that they'll be looking for projects that kind of cross boundaries or have regional impact. And so I was also thinking about talking to a councillor from Central Saanich about 3 weeks ago, and they already had their list of shovel-ready projects in anticipation of whether it's going to be provincial or federal funding. And so it makes me think that, you know, we're going to be in competition with our neighbors down the highway. And so whether we're looking at, when we're looking at those projects, are there ones that we could put forward that have that sort of regional benefit that would sort of give us more points, I guess, on the scale? So I don't know if that's something staff are looking at, whether active transportation might fall within that because it benefits surrounding municipalities as well. Yeah. The other, so I guess just tossing that out there for staff's consideration. A question I did have though was about the survey of businesses, and I know that I think there was a intention to have some information on that to us soon, but I understand there's been issues contacting businesses because the contact information is outdated. So I'm wondering if are there plans afoot to, you know, find other ways to communicate with businesses? Is there a number that, you know, if I'm talking to a business that I can say, hey, we're doing a survey. If you want to participate, call this number. Is that sort of a facility available?
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, yes, we are in the middle of doing the survey of businesses of Sydney. So we've got EOC staff working on that right now, and I can provide a quick update. We've contacted about 400 businesses. 175 surveys have been completed. A lot of businesses, they haven't answered the phone when the person conducting the survey has called. So 175 completed approximately to date. That's been starting out top of the list and then working down, then deciding to focus in on downtown restaurants and food service establishments, given the nature of the second report on the agenda tonight about expanding public pedestrian space and business space in the downtown, wanting to get an idea of, is that something that those businesses might be interested in? And then looking at retail businesses in the downtown, so they were contacted next, and then reaching out to other sectors of businesses, some Westside Industrial, some Harbor Road Marine, some home-based businesses. So we have made an attempt to contact about 400. And as you said, some of our business license information is out of date. That would happen when a business has made changes and has not updated their information at the town hall. So every time somebody renews a business license application, staff do ask, is all of your information up to date? Do you have any updates to make? And then they add in those changes when the business owner indicates. So we hope going forward that business owners might keep their information more up to date with the town.
Yeah.
But we are moving forward with that, and we are going to consider emailing out the link to the survey. So I'll be speaking with the chamber and the SBIA about that soon, but we haven't done that yet. We found that the businesses that have been contacted have been really appreciative of that personal contact and of just taking the effort to call them, see how they're doing, and they recognize that the support we can provide is limited. We can't fix everything, but they do appreciate the call and appreciate the chance to share their experience so far.
Yeah. So is there, if we happen to be speaking to businesses, which we often are, is there a number that they can call into if they've sort of been missed or they want to participate, or what would be the best way to direct them?
They could contact that emergency operations center number, the dedicated phone number that's on the website, so they can call that if they like.
Okay, good. All right. So yeah, thanks for that. And then I guess just getting back to, you know, I mentioned a little bit about, you know, is it time to activate our Economic Advisory Committee? And so just wondered to staff whether you see a role coming up for them, whether you need council to initiate that, or what role, if any, do you see them playing in terms of, you know, providing ideas, input, collaboration for some of the recovery plans?
Yeah, I think as we go through the results of the business survey and get a feel of what the needs are in the community, then we can assess how might we fit those needs and look at what the Economic Advisory Committee could do there and look at their potential roles they could fill. And then we'd speak with Mr. Humble as the CAO about that.
Okay, yep, thank you.
Mr. Humboldt.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I appreciate certainly the raising of the matter in terms of opportunities to utilize the Economic Advisory Committee, and certainly that's something that, as everyone knows, should go through council in terms of any recommendations for the EAC going through council on that. It's also important to note that. Again, given the membership, the diverse membership of the EAC, some being business owners, et cetera, that again, we haven't reached out to find out what sort of, I guess, where they are at with respect to their own businesses, what they have going on right now. But I anticipate some of them are extremely busy. I think others have more time on their hands, et cetera. So. I just think it's an important dichotomy to understand in terms of where EAC is at as well before we sort of, put additional load on the entire committee. Because I know, again, each individual member is at a different stage right now as well. So important to point that out. Thank you.
Great. Chief Mickelson.
Yes, I would just like to add, provide a little bit of additional information into the survey to date. Of the 175 individuals we've contacted, approximately 36 have inquired about expanding their business out onto the sidewalk. 76 requested business liaison visits, further business liaison visits, and then another 10 were considering or looking for assistance in changing their service delivery model. So there's some pretty good data in respect from a fairly decent sample size from what we've managed to accomplish so far. So yeah, I think we have a decent handle on, and then if we can get we're probably halfway there, but I think we're well on our way to getting a good understanding of what the requirements are and the needs, at least in the downtown core.
Thank you for that, Dave. It's appreciated. Councillor O'Keefe, you're good? Thank you. Okay. Seeing no further discussion, if we could have a motion to receive.
I'll move receipt for information.
Second.
I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. And thank you to the recovery team and all of the EOC staff and regular town staff for their contributions. We'll now turn to item 13B, which is also EOC recovery planning, but it's a particular topic, the pedestrian and business use of public space in the downtown core. And we have a report from staff dated May 21st.
I'll move the recommendation. Number 1, that staff monitor the situation around pedestrian levels, lineups for commercial businesses, and demand for outdoor seating for food vending businesses, addressing pinch points as they arise by repurposing on-street parking spaces as protected pedestrian spaces or outdoor seating areas, with the expectation that staff will report back to council and public engagement occur if closing streets to traffic or repurposing entire block faces of on-street parking spaces is warranted. 2, that staff be directed to bring forward an amendment to off-street parking and loading bylaw number 2140 to allow outdoor seating associated with restaurants and cafes in a portion of required off-street parking spaces for consideration by council. And 3, that staff be directed to bring forward amendment to sidewalk cafe regulations and licensing bylaw number 2177 to allow sidewalk cafe areas to extend out beyond the edge of the sidewalk and into the street for consideration by council.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor Fallett and Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm really quite excited to see something like this move forward, and that we are open to doing what we need to do to address the needs of our community. One thing that comes up to mind right now as we're increasing pedestrian traffic, there's also, we have the people who are using wheelchairs and walkers, etc. So that as we do any adjustments to how sidewalks and roadways are being used, and if we're going to look at outdoor cafes and whatnot, that we ensure that the traffic flow for those who are using mobility aids is maintained and considered as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, support the motion, good ideas. And I think that, yeah, it's great that staff are asking in the survey up front what businesses might want to have sidewalk space. Also building on Councillor Fallett's point about persons with disabilities. So not just the actual sidewalks themselves, but I'm not sure off the top of my head how many parking spaces that there are in the town for persons with disabilities. Those that I know, it is often hard for them to get a suitable parking space that allows them to open their ramp over. So I guess I would just be have that in our mind when we're looking to close off parking spaces on the street that might impact those persons with disabilities.
Thank you, Councillor.
That's all.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, that's Councillor O'Keefe just spoke to the point I was going to bring up. I like the idea in principle. I think it has merit, but I am concerned about people in our community with mobility issues who live outside of the downtown core and would have to bring their vehicles in to do shopping or frequent a certain business on Main Street. And depending on where we block off the parking spaces, is it going to make it more challenging for them to have to go an extra block or two, which may seem nothing to an average person, but to them could present a real obstacle. So that's something that I would hope we would look into consideration when we're making that decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm certainly very supportive of the recommendations, and I thank staff for putting together what I find to be very reasonable suggestions to help the business community in particular. I do have some concerns similar to what Councillor Garnett has stated with respect to the number of parking spaces that we may be talking about, and it may be unfair, but perhaps if I could, through the staff, when you look at where you anticipate these pinch points, is there some sort of a number in mind that we're talking about to perhaps alleviate the concern of some businesses that it's not overly significant, and in particular in the context of construction closures, parking, it's something I think that we need to manage quite closely. So if I may, through to staff, if you've got any comment around what you may anticipate for parking spot closures.
Through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, I can't speak right now about how many parking spaces we might be looking at changing soon. The one area that has been identified as a pinch point was mentioned in the staff report, the Sydney Bakery area, that's south side of Beacon, just east of 2nd Street. The sidewalk isn't wide there, and there's a number of food establishments close by. So that might be the first area that we look at. There's several on-street parking spaces there. But apart from that, I can't speak right now to how many parking spaces we'd be looking to repurpose in the immediate future. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other speakers, I'll call the question. All those in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you for the discussion. We'll now turn to item 13C, which is the Kelset Ray Creek Pond Contamination Remediation and Dam Update. Report dated May 19th. And I might just turn before we move a motion to Mr. Humble and a very recent development that was communicated to Council today, but would be helpful for the public.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Council. So yeah, one thing was noted in the report that indicated Transport Canada, the federal government, was poised to proceed with respect to moving forward with the invitation to tender for the construction management team that would lead the Ray Creek Pond contamination remediation project. So today we received actually notification from Transport Canada that in fact the invitation to tender for the remediation project has gone out this morning. So it has been posted. It's on the Public Works and Government Services Canada website. It's their buyandsell.gc.ca website, so it can be viewed there. It's important to note that the tender closes on Friday, June 12th at 2 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. And just a quick update that both the Friends of Ray Creek Residents Association and Peninsula Streams, Mr. Humble communicated with, and I've had the opportunity to send communication, including tonight's report, to the Wasonic Leadership Council as partners on this project.
I'll move receipt for information.
Second.
Further, any discussion? Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff, I read the tender you forwarded to us. I didn't see any mention of the dam, so I'm just curious, is that something that'll happen after the process? They're not mentioning in there that there might be something attached to the work, so is that something that once the tender is offered, they'll approach them and say, would you be willing to do this as well at the same time? Or is that something you can answer to? Or?
Yep. If I can speak, through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, that's an excellent question. It is something that would have to happen after the awarding of the tender, and basically it would be more or less, my understanding, the responsibility of the town to approach the successful bidder, who the contract is awarded to. We would approach that construction team and then basically discuss the feasibility of them undertaking the dam project concurrently with the pond remediation, and to see about the feasibility of that. As indicated in the update, it is something that if it is to happen concurrently, given the feasibility of undertaking the work at the same time, having safe work procedures, etc., it needs to be undertaken by a single contractor. So hopefully that's possible for it to be undertaken. If not, the dam work would have to proceed in the next subsequent year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. Thank you, Councillor. And so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll turn to the item that we've moved up in the agenda. It is 14A on our agenda package, but we're considering it as item 13D1, and that is the 2020 grant for the Folk and Fiddle Festival. And we have an email from Folk and Fiddle Festival dated April 2nd.
I'll move the recommendation that the $1,000 previously approved as a grant to the Folk and Fiddle Festival be withheld and reallocated to support Sydney's Canada Day Live from the Mary Winspear Centre initiative.
Second.
Any discussion? I just want to thank Folk and Fiddle Festival for taking the initiative and writing to the town with this offer and this suggestion, which I think is appropriate in the circumstances. And seeing no discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll now turn to item 13D2, which is the funding allocation for Canada Day celebrations.
I'll move the recommendation that Council approves the allocation of $5,000 from the annual Canada Day budget to support Sydney's Canada Day Live from the Mary Winspear Centre.
Second.
Discussion? I just have one reason for renumbering these items was based on the previous resolutions. So I might turn to Mr. Hissick if he has a comment. The report that we've received, funding allocation for Canada Day celebrations, was and the recommendation of $5,000 was recommended previous, or the report was written previous to the decision, the outcome with regards to Folk and Fiddle. So we do have the option to award or to grant the $5,000 out of the $11,000 budget, or we could reduce it to $4,000 because of the $1,000 coming from Folk and Fiddle, and I might turn to Mr. Hissick.
Mr. Mayor, you've captured it all. There's nothing for me to say.
Okay. Well, we had the conversation earlier, so I just wanted to give you that opportunity. So we do have a motion on the floor for $5,000, and I'll open it up to any other discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we have item 13E, which is the 2019 year-end financial results. And we have a recommendation in the report.
I'll move that the report be received for information.
Second.
Any discussion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just a couple questions. One thing I was wondering was the amounts for the docks and ports, so for the Washington State ferries, and that we get rent from that, which covers a lot of the costs. And so what I was wondering is, if Washington State ferries opts to not start up their season this year, either because it's too late or the border remains closed, do we still get rent on that, or is it just if they're using the wharf?
Through the mayor, we have billed them the annual lease cost. They have not yet asked for any relaxation, but if they do, that's for council to consider.
Okay. And just the other thing I wondered about was about the community safety building. And I note to staff's comment that there's a more in-depth report coming in June. And I guess what I'm wondering and hoping is that that we'll be able to get a breakdown of what specific aspects of the project went over budget, and whether we would have some analysis or some recommendations maybe from staff on things that council might want to consider in the future when we're looking at such big projects. So, did we underscope the project? Did we lack expertise? I know that there was issues with getting contractors in place. So I think it would be useful to be able to gather some lessons learned for the future from that, if that's possible.
Through the mayor, these questions have already been asked, so staff will certainly be addressing them.
Great. And then just one other thing about, I'm just looking at item number 3, the general operating fund. So the policing contract was less, and so it talked about an additional portion of these savings was transferred to reserves, I think 152, and then 83,004 set aside for salary increases. So is there a bit more, so the balance that's left, does that just go into surplus, or how does that get reallocated? I think, am I correct in that there's about another 100,000 there, or maybe I'm not understanding that correctly?
Through the mayor again, what normally happens is it falls to surplus, but you may recall that over the past budget, we decided to set some aside for some of the capital works that are happening this year and next year.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that reminder. That's good for me, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And just to confirm through staff on that same item, it was a question of mine. This was the first year that we did set monies aside in that future RCMP capital projects. Thank you. Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not a question, just more a comment. Thank you, Mr. Hisik, for the report. It's very easy to read and follow. I just wanted to thank you for the efforts you put forward, because as I've been following the pandemic and listening to various communities who are struggling financially, and granted we're not as big as a lot of them, but I think you've done some excellent work in the past. It's put us in a really good position, and I think it's at your credit to the town for the work you've done, so thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to add, I know Mr. Restak has joined us this evening, and your name is at the top of the report, along with Mr. Hissick. So thank you for the work that went into the detailed report. Seeing no other discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. So we're now down to item 13B, which is the CRD Harbor Program Service and Open Moorage Management of Brentwood Bay, and a letter that we received from the District of Central Saanich dated May 5th.
I'll move, refer this to staff for a report.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor Wintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I take it from the references in here, quite clearly this has been referred to the District of North Saanich as well, through to staff. Do we know if this was well received in North Saanich Council, or if it's made their agenda as of yet?
If I can, through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, indeed it has made its way to North Saanich. I can't say for certain if it's gone to their council yet, Councillor Rintoul. I did participate in a brief teleconference between the administrator in Central Saanich that submitted this letter, as well as Mr. Tanton from North Saanich, to discuss this, and both Mr. Tanton and I were open to considering this and looking at this, but again, as you can see from the letter, I mean, it's that we would certainly be looking for more detail on this moving forward. And it's also important to note that council, through the budget process, has already funded a certain amount for the town staff to work with North Saanich staff on some sort of blueprint plan moving forward to figure out how to address this challenging issue. So this is obviously a different course of action if we were to go down this road. But as a suggestion in the letter, they're also indicating the potential for CRD's harbor program service to be involved as well. And it's certainly, we're open to it, but we'll report back to council regarding more detail.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We have no new business. We have correspondence for information.
I move receipt.
Second.
All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we have no notices of motion, but we have a motion to go in camera.
I'll move that it is in the opinion of council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of council and officers be excluded from the meeting to consider confidential matters relating to personal information pursuant to section 90.1A of the community charter, and that council continue the meeting in closed session.
Second.
All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Motion carries.